Life in a Filipino barrio during the Spanish era. There is something slow and unbothered about a time long gone, a time where roosters, not alarm clocks, signaled the day's beginning, and where the most urgent matter was whether the firewood was dry enough to cook breakfast. In this journey, we'll drift back into the heart of the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines, not to discuss its wars or uprisings, but to quietly walk through the peaceful, almost forgotten rhythms of ordinary life. This is not the history of heroes or traitors. It is the history of clay pots of rice, paddies of quiet conversations under the stars, of a mother brushing her daughter's hair while humming a kundaman she does not realize is older than her grandmother's grandmother. It is a history where days moved slow enough for the wind to be noticed, and where a person could live their entire life within the same patch of land without ever being considered irrelevant. This is the story of a simple barrio, somewhere unnamed but familiar, nestled in the folds of nature, far from the chaos of Manila or the concerns of the gobernador Shilo. This village breathes with the pulse of the land. Chickens scratch the dirt beside carabaos yawning into the sun. The air smells of boiled root crops, laundry dried on bamboo lines, and the first burning embers of wood prepared for morning cooking. The people here do not rush. Even their troubles come gently rains. That delayed planting, a broken sandal, a whispered rumor about a new priest. For now, however, we are here not to judge nor to analyze. We are here to listen, observe, and fall slowly, deeply, and silently into their world. Let us lie down in their woven mats, hear the distant call of the hornbill, and forget the noise of our own time. Let this story tuck you into a long, uneventful, and peaceful dream. Morning in the Bahay Cubo. The sun does not rise in this barrio with urgency. It peaks. It leans gently over the tips of the coconut trees, painting the nepa roofs in muted gold. Inside a small Bahay Cubo perched on stilts. The morning begins, not with shouting or sirens, but with the slow stirrings of a household that knows no rush. The floor, made of bamboo slats, creaks softly as the mother, still half asleep, swings her feet over the edge of the sleeping mat and stands. She doesn't say a word. There's no need. The roosters already did the job of waking everyone, and the scent of the morning air, the mix of smoke from the neighbors' fires, the wet earth from the night's dew, and the distant pleasant scent of banana. Levs reminds her that another day has begun, as it always has. The family does not speak much yet. The children are still curled up under a thin having-a-loco blanket, faces soft in sleep, limbs sprawled like vines over the edge of the woven mat. The father, already awake, steps quietly outside to check the bamboo basket of yuling left under the eaves. He scratches his head, yawns, and then, slowly and deliberately, squats beside the small dapog, the outdoor clay stove. His movements are quiet, ritualistic. There is no clock ticking, no bus to catch, only the certainty that rice must be cooked before the sun climbs too high. He blows gently into the pile of embers and listens as the soft crackling begins again, like the sound of a faraway stream. The kitchen is not a separate room, but simply a part of the raised cubo platform where pots hang from thick cords tied to beams. A basket of camote sits beside a clay jar of water drawn yesterday from the nearby. The mother picks up the palayak, running her fingers gently over its rounded shape, feeling for cracks. She moves without urgency, every gesture like a memory passed down from generations. She scoops washed rice into the pot, adds water by feel not measuring, but trusting the weight of her hands, and places it over the revived fire. There's a rhythm to it all. It is the rhythm of living, not producing, of surviving, not striving. Outside, the light deepens, slowly painting the small patch of garden beside the cubo in brighter greens. Malunggay leaves glisten with dew. A chicken hops onto the bamboo fence, its claws clicking on the dry stalk. A card stretches in the sunlight, completely unconcerned with anything beyond its next nap. The world is fully awake now, but it is not loud. It is not rushed. Everything happens the way it should, the way it has, for decades, perhaps centuries. The mother sits by the fire, slicing a small tilapia caught yesterday. She doesn't look tired. Her face, though lined, holds peace, not the dramatic kind, but the one earned by routine, by simplicity. She hums a tune quietly, not for anyone to hear, just for herself. It's a lullaby. She doesn't remember where she'd learned it. Perhaps her own mother sang it while cooking rice this same way, decades ago, under a similar sky, beside a similar fire. One of the children stood. A small boy, no older than 7, sits up and blinks slowly. He rubs his eyes and stares at the roof. A gecko stares back, He doesn't scream. He just watches, breathing in the smell of steaming rice, listening to the whispering fire. Then he lies back down, not because he's still tired, but because he can. There is no rush. Even the sun seems in no hurry today. The family eats quietly when the rice is ready. No table, just a low dian-like platform woven from rattan where everyone squats or kneels. Rice is shared with a bit of salt, one fried fish, and boiled sweet potato leaves. Nobody complains. Nobody counts, bites. They eat slowly, talking softly about the weather, the neighbor's new goat, and whether or not the Spanish friar will pass by again this week. After eating, the dishes are rinsed with a ladle of cool water, then placed back into their spot. The mother wipes her hands on her kimono. The father stretches, and as the sun lifts higher, the whole house exhales. There is a sense that the day has truly begun, but still nothing hurries. The wind rustles the coconut leaves. Somewhere, a wooden bell rings from the chapel. The barrio lives, not in urgency, but in rhythm. And in that rhythm, sleep comes easy. A walk to the poblation. There is no reason to rush. Not here. The walk to the poblation is long, but not difficult. It is the kind of path that has been shaped more by footsteps than by tools, worn smooth by bare soles over the decades. It starts as a narrow trail behind the Baje Cubo, weaving between short banana trees and tall, proud grasses that brush gently against the legs of anyone who passes. Morning dew clings to the edges of the leaves, shimmering like quiet stars, and each step through the earth leaves a soft, damp imprint that fades just as quickly as it's made. The boy from earlier, the one who had watched the gecko and listened to the fire, now walks with his older sister. She carries a woven basket slung over one arm, filled only with a few eggs, some small ginger roots, and a folded piece of cloth. She hums the same lullaby their mother had been humming earlier. It passes from one mouth to another like a whisper moving through generations. Never fully remembered, never fully forgotten. Her feet are bare, so are his. There are no shoes, but no one minds. The earth here is soft, and the rocks are polite. Along the way, they pass a narrow bamboo bridge, no wider than a man's arm span. Below it flows a shallow stream, its waters murmuring softly over pebbles smoothed by centuries. There are fish here, small and silver, darting beneath shadows. The boy stops to stare. The girl lets him. There is time. The stream will not run away, and the population will not disappear. There are no clocks waiting to punish their delay, only the sun, and even it, today, seems to rise like an old man, stretching slowly from bed. They continue on. The scent of the earth begins to change. First, they smell the nearby coconut groves so sweet, then the faint aroma of drying tobacco leaves, hanging in the window of a neighbor's hut. Later still, as they approach the edge of the village center, the sharper scent of oil and frying bananas floats in on the breeze. Somewhere, someone is already preparing maruya for the noontime meal. The sound of a wooden spatula clinking against a pan is the only sign of life, louder than the cicadas, which hummed like 1,000 tiny crickets rehearsing in unison. The population itself is not large. It is a clearing, really a large, grassy space framed by a few stone buildings, and many more wooden ones. The largest of these is the simbahan, the church, its bells silent but its walls proud. Built of stone and coral blocks carried by hand long ago, it rises above the huts like an old sentinel. Beside it, a narrow plaza lies sleepy under the sun, its cobblestones warm to the touch, its benches still empty. An old man naps under a mango tree at the edge of the square, a shalacoat tilted over his eyes and a barely touched cane beside him. Vendors begin to set up near the puesto small tables, woven mats, and baskets of boiled peanuts, dried fish, and woven goods. There is no shouting here, no haggling yet, just the quiet dance of morning preparation. A woman adjusts her shawl and carefully places her wares in symmetrical rows. A boy sweeps the ground gently with a bundled broom. The air smells of wax from a nearby candle vendor who quietly arranges sticks of incense into neat lines. A priest passes in the distance, his black robe swaying gently as he enters the church. He does not look hurried either. The siblings approach one of the stalls. The sister trades the ginger for a few small lumps of brown sugar wrapped in banana leaf. The vendor smiles, not saying much, just a soft nod, as if to say this is enough. There is no receipt, no register, only trust. The kind that's grown like trees, slow and rooted in shared rain and memory. The boy chews a piece of sugar given to him by the vendor, quietly, not even asking if he could have it. Here, kindness comes in small, expected shapes. Nearby, a horse tied under a tree flicks its tail lazily. A cart rests beside it, half loaded with woven mats and old sacks of rice. A dog sleeps underneath the cart, twitching in its dreams. A small group of women sits by the church wall, embroidering. They do not stop when the children walk by. One of them looks up, recognizes the girl, and gives a quiet nod. That is all the greeting needed. They do not stay long. The heat begins to rise, and the long walk home waits patiently behind the trees. But the path back is no different than before. The same fish still swim under the bridge. The same grass still brushes their legs. The same birds still sing the same sleepy songs from the canopy above. And when they finally reach the Bahay Kubo again, their father is napping under the shade, using one arm as a pillow and the other to shield his eyes from the light. The mother sits nearby, weaving quietly. The chickens have not moved far. The fire's been covered, and once again, the wind carries no urgency, just the soft rustle of leaves, the breath of a house alive with peace, and the sound of history repeating in silence. Siesta, candle smoke, and village whispers. The sun, now hanging high and heavy in the sky, casts a gentle haze over the barrio. The light has lost its sharpness, softening into a warm shimmer that seems to blur the lines between the trees, the houses, and the ground. It is siesta time. Even the birds, once so eager in the morning, have quieted down. They perch lazily on the branches, wings half tucked, as if waiting for the day to pass on its own without their involvement. The world does not stop, but it certainly slows. Inside the Bahay Kubo, the heat drifts in through the open windows, but it is not unwelcome. It brings with it the smell of crushed leaves, old wood, and the faint perfume of the ylang-ylang flowers blooming just beyond the backyard. The scent floats in and mingles with the soft smoke of a slowly melting candela, lit not for ceremony but for scent and silence. It stands alone in the corner, its wax dripping onto a small saucer, forming little pools that harden like forgotten moments. The candle flickers not because of any wind, but because even still, air breathes differently during siesta. Everyone is resting now. The mother lies on a woven banig, her arm draped gently over her forehead, her chest rising and falling in slow, deep rhythm. She is not quite asleep, not quite awake, the kind of in-between rest only siesta can offer, a pause between doing and dreaming. Beside her, the younger child plays quietly with 2 pieces of coconut shell, pretending they are animals in a world only he can see. His voice never rises. He speaks to them in whispers, careful not to disturb the calm that has spread like a blanket over the house. The father, still outside but now fully surrendered to sleep, lies under the shadow of a bamboo pole, a ponyo over his face. One sandal has fallen off. His fingers twitch occasionally, perhaps dreaming of some long errand or a younger version of himself who once raced carabaos in the field. Sleep makes him look smaller, not tired, but preserved like something wrapped gently in cloth and memory. The sister sits by the small wooden altar near the window, polishing the frame of the family's only printed image of the Santa Niña. It is faded, but lovingly preserved. She does not rush. A soft cloth moves in slow circles over the glass, and, from time to time, she glances out the window not for anything in particular, just to check if the world is still there. The silence is not uncomfortable. It is wide, generous, filled with invisible things. The creak of bamboo in the wind, the rustle of drying leaves on the roof, the distant roll of a wooden cart being pulled slowly along the road beyond the trees. In another house, a baby cries, but even that sound seems muted, softened by the thick afternoon air. Somewhere farther down the path, a group of elders sits in a shaded hut, playing a quiet game of the sound of shells being dropped into hollowed wood is rhythmic, almost musical. They do not speak much. Each move is made with the same calm as breathing. Every now and then, someone chuckles low, dry, and short-lived before falling back into silence. A dog yawns from beneath the house, exposing teeth that have chewed through many a slipper, but now only dream of food. A chicken pecks gently at the ground near it, unafraid, as if knowing they are both too lazy to care about territory right now. Time, like everyone else, seems to have laid down for a nap. As the candle continues to burn, its flame begins to lean sideways. A breeze, perhaps, or maybe just the room breathing. The wax forms tiny rivers now, cooling in tiny sculptures along the saucer. The smell of melted wax and old wood fills the room, curling around the beams like a gentle sigh. No one notices. That is the nature of these quiet hours. Things happen, but without drama. Events unfold, but without announcement. By now, even the distant laughter from the children playing behind the church is faded, not because they are gone, but because even play has limits in this heat. They've likely retreated under some tree, poking sticks into the earth, tracing shapes that will be forgotten by evening. A lizard clings to the wall, unmoving. A fly buzzes once, then disappears. A shadow shifts on the floor, growing longer. Siesta is not a time. It is a state, a long, invisible bridge between morning and night. In the barrio, this pause is sacred. Not for prayer, necessarily, but for stillness. For giving back to the body the calm stolen by labor. It is in these hours that the house holds its people, like a soft hammock supporting them, swinging them, not forward but inward. The walls do not speak. The floorboards make no complaints. Everything listens, breathes, rests. And in this stillness, even the story waits. It too will continue, but not yet. Candlelight, storytelling, and the first stars. Evening does not arrive in this barrio there are no sudden shifts in light, no dramatic sunsets viewed from glass windows, no alarms telling people to stop what they're doing. Instead, the night comes the way smoke does quietly, slowly, weaving itself into corners without asking permission. The warm gold of the afternoon fades into the gentlest gray, and the sky once blinding softens like a warm blanket soaked in violet ink. The shadows grow taller, and everything begins to fold itself back inward. Inside the Bahay Cubo, the candle that had burned during siesta is replaced with a fresh one. Its flame flickers as it catches, throwing tall, lazy shadows across the bamboo walls. There is no electricity here, only fire. It dances across familiar faces, making them look older, wiser, or sometimes more mysterious than they are. The room does not glow, it breathes. The flame casts enough light to show outlines. The edge of a basket, the curve of a cheek, the gloss of a sleeping child's hair. Nothing more is needed. The mother begins preparing dinner. The sound of chopped vegetables and the gentle stirring of soup returns a rhythm to the home. A pot simmers quietly, filled with yuton made of salayat leaves, sliced upo, and a few bits of dried fish. It's not a feast, but it is enough. The scent alone, earthy and nostalgic, fills the home with comfort. The father, now fully awake, sits on the porch, sharpening a bolo not because it's needed, but because it's a habit he learned from his own father. A motion that calms. The sound metal brushing stone is steady, slow, and soothing, like a heartbeat you didn't know you missed. Outside, the neighborhood begins to murmur. Fires are lit in other homes. You can see them flickering behind woven windows and beneath raised floors. Chickens settle into their coops with soft, disgruntled clucks. A goat bleats once, then falls quiet. The frogs begin their nightly chorus soft at first, then bold. They do not ask for attention, but they fill the silence just enough to keep it from being lonely. After dinner, which is shared without ceremony, the family gathers near the window. The breeze is cooler now. It carries the scent of nighttime, banana leaves, charcoal smoke, and something sweeter, perhaps a neighbor's late dessert, maybe just the memory of one. The children listen as their father begins to speak. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't announce he's about to tell a story. He simply starts, the way his father once did, and his grandfather before that. He tells of a forest spirit that guards the mango grove, of a man who once traded his voice for gold, and of a bird that could predict illness by singing at midnight. His voice is slow, deliberate, like each word is a leaf floating down a still river. The children do not interrupt. They watch the shape of his mouth, the rise and fall of his eyebrows, the shadow of his hands as they gesture subtly in the candlelight. The mother listens too, occasionally adding a detail, correcting a name, or reminding the children which story is true, and which is only true if you believe in it enough. She laughs softly at one tale about a neighbor who once claimed he was turned into a pig for stealing tamarind. No one says whether they believe it, they don't have to. The story itself is more important than whether it really happened. Above them, stars begin to peek out. The roof of the kubo doesn't block them. You can see through the eaves, through the holes in the thatch, and catch pieces of the sky shiny and quiet, like buttons sewn onto a blanket. The moon is a gentle sliver tonight, not too bright, not too dark, just enough to show you the outline of things and leave the rest to your imagination. A lull settles over the house. No one speaks for a while. The children lean against their mother's shoulder. The wind moves through the open windows like a whispered lullaby, lifting the edges of the mosquito net as if tucking it around them. The candle flickers again, then outside, the frogs continued their song. A cicada clicks once. A dog barks far in the distance, then nothing. It is in this silence that the story really lives. Not in the words, but in the air between them. in the warmth of being close together, in the sense that the world outside might be wide and strange, but this house is small, candlelit space is enough, it is safe, it is still. And so, they sit a little longer, not speaking, just breathing together, listening to the dark, waiting for sleep to come, not with drama, but with the same softness that brought them morning. The fiesta looms early, cooking and warm gossip, long before the music begins, long before the plaza is filled with lanterns and laughter. There is a quieter kind of fiesta that only the barrio folks understand. It begins not with a bang, but with the simmer-soft movements in kitchens, hushed conversations over fences, and old women stirring pots while watching the sky. It is the eve before the eve, when the excitement exists only in suggestion, and not yet in sound. And in this still moment, the whole barrio begins to breathe together in anticipation. The first sign that something is coming is the smell. It drifts slowly through the air just before dusk, thicker than usual, fuller somehow like a promise hanging above the rooftops. Boiled peanuts, garlic frying in oil, simmering dinuguan, bubbling in white clay, pots with fat slices of banana trunk, the kind of food that needs hours, not minutes. The kind of cooking that starts before hunger and continues long after everyone is full. The houses near the center begin this first. Women in faded duster dresses wave at one another from doorways, holding wooden spoons like scepters of a quiet kingdom. In the corner of one hut, an old woman crushes spices with a stone mortar passed down from her mother. The bawang and laya combine into a paste so familiar, it needs no recipe. The sound of the dike dick is steady, almost meditative. Children peek through the slats in the bamboo wall, hoping to catch sight of the beginnings of kakanin, those sticky rice cakes wrapped in banana leaf, folded by hand with the same care one might fold a letter to a long-lost friend. The feast is still a day away, but the barrio prepares slowly and gently, as if the act of preparing is just as sacred as the feast itself. Neighbors come and go, not to party yet, but to check in. They bring bowls to borrow, banana leaves to share, and stories to tell. No one knocks. They simply call out softly from the gate or slip into the doorway with a familiar laugh. Gossip floats with the steam. Who burned the rice again? Whose goat went missing? Whose daughter was seen talking to the boy from across the river? But even the chismis is slow and harmless, wrapped in affection, more curious than cruel. These are not tales meant to scandalize. They are meant to fill the air like a second flavor, spicy but safe. In the small front yard of a Bahay Kubo, a father and son slowly tie Banderitastani triangle flags cut from old plastic bags and strung along a piece of coconut rope. The boy asks if he can climb the tree to hang them, and the father simply nods, pointing out which branch is safest. The climb is not fast. Every step is a deliberate negotiation between the foot and the bark. But the boy does not fall, and soon the flags ripple gently in the wind like little tongues, whispering secrets into the dusk. As night arrives, the cooking continues. Some families begin roasting pork on bamboo spits over low coals. The crackle of fat dripping into fire is both mouth-watering and hypnotic. Others make slowly stirring the coconut milk until it thickens and darkens into something sweet and sticky and impossible to rush. There is music, but only faintly. A radio in the background hums with an old kundaman, its melody so soft it could be mistaken for the wind. Somewhere, someone taps rhythmically on a ladder, turning a soup can into a soft drum. No one dances, not yet. The young ones gather near the small barangay hall, not to play, but to practice their skit. The annual performance is simple, usually a folk story told in the most dramatic way. They know how. This year, it's about the firefly who challenged the moon. The costumes are made of cardboard and broom straw. The laughter during rehearsal is quiet but real. A girl forgets her line and hides behind her friend. A boy forgets he's not supposed to talk until Act 2. No one minds. The night is still young, and the joy is still growing. Back in the houses, the older folk begin to set aside food for tomorrow's altar offering. Small plates with bits of rice, slices of egg, a wedge of cassava cake. The offerings are not grand. They are reminders of gratitude, of survival, of another year in the same home, with the same walls, and the same stars watching from above. And those stars clearer now brighter begin to fill the sky like candlelight spilled across black velvet. They seem to pulse in time with the barrio's heartbeat. Slow, steady, certain the fiesta is near, but for now, it is still quiet. The anticipation is not loud. It lives in the warmth of rice, steam steam rising from a pot, in the flicker of a single candle on a wooden table, in the shared silences of people who've known each other their whole lives. Sleep will come again soon, but tonight it will arrive wrapped in the scent of coconut and grilled meat, in the glow of faint laughter, in the knowledge that tomorrow will be loud and full, but tonight, the quiet celebration belongs to those who prepared it with love. Midnight whispers and the spirits watching. The night deepens until it no longer feels like an ending, but a long pause between two heartbeats. Midnight in the barrio is not filled with howling winds or restless streets. It is hushed. Even the dogs, usually quick to bark at rustling leaves or passing shadows, are quiet now. They lie curled in the corners of the yard, heads resting on their paws, eyes open but unfocused, as if they, too, are waiting for something to pass through. Inside the Bahay Kubo, the children lie side by side on a wide banig, their limbs tangled like vines in a garden. The parents lie close, but not touching, each surrendered to their own rhythm of breathing, their own drifting thoughts. A mosquito net hangs gently over them, swaying ever so slightly with a breeze that slips through the bamboo slats. It casts soft, netted shadows across their skin, as though the night itself were trying to hold them safely in its arms. The candle by the altar has melted nearly to its base. Its flame is small now, flickering low, but determined not to die until morning. Its light touches the face of the Santo Niña, whose expression, unchanged for decades, now seems more alive. In the behind that image are older, once blurred photos of long-gone grandparents, yellowed prayer cards, and folded notes tucked into the corners of the frame. Names whispered during novenas, requests written by hand, promises made during past fiestas and never quite fulfilled. Out in the dark, the Dion tide between two mango trees sways slightly, even though no one is in it. The wind is light, almost nothing, but the trees creak just enough to be noticed. Not frightening, just old, just present. The kind of sound that reminds you the world is still turning, even if no one is awake to watch it. Somewhere in the distance, a kuliglig hums. It is not the sharp trill of crickets, nor the dramatic croak of frogs. This is something softer, a vibration in a background of silence, like a thread tying one night to the next. The fields beyond the house stretch under the moonlight, their tips gleaming with dew. The carabao, tied lazily to a post, blinks once, then again, before settling back into stillness. Even the animals feel the weight of this hour. Midnight is when the old stories begin to stir, not spoken aloud, but felt. The tailies about spirits walking between the trees, about capers sitting in the dark tops of acacia trees, about duendes guarding the old termite mounds behind the garden. No one says these things at this hour, not because they're afraid, but because they respect the quiet. Words of weight here. Whispers carry farther, and besides, why wake something that is already watching? The wind picks up, just slightly. It rustles the edge of the nipa roof, nudging a dried palm leaf to fall. It lands softly, unnoticed. The stars above have multiplied. They dot the night like fireflies caught in place, each one steady, each one older than any name spoken in this house. The moon is thin now, a silver cut across the black, but bright enough to light the path between the houses. If someone were to walk now, barefoot through the path leading to the chapel, they'd see their shadows stretch far behind them, longer than they are, longer than they should be. And yet no one walks, not now. The barrio has given itself over to sleep. The last pots have been covered, the last ladles rinsed and hung on hooks. The water jar has been sealed with a coconut lid. The embers of the fire have turned into glowing red eyes beneath the ash, watchful, but calm. Tomorrow will be busy. There will be music, food, laughter, prayer, and footsteps pounding the plaza's stones. But tonight belongs to the unseen. There is a quiet belief here, passed from lips to ears, that the night before fiesta is when the ancianos come to visit, not in body, but in breeze, in dreams, in the warmth that lingers even after the fire dies. They visit to listen, to remember, to check if their names are still known, to feel, for just a moment, the rhythm of their old world still beating inside the new. The boy stirs in his sleep. He mumbles something nonsense to the waking world, but perhaps a greeting to someone no longer alive. His mother, half asleep, turns and adjusts the net, smoothing it across his leg without opening her eyes. Her hand lingers there a moment longer than it needs to, then falls back gently to her side. The candle finally gives out. A soft hiss, a tiny curl of smoke, and then only the moon, and silence. Dawn of the fiesta smoke, drums, and smiling eyes. The morning of the fiesta does not begin with noise. Not yet. It starts with a thin curl of smoke rising from kitchens long before the sun touches the rooftops. It starts with the gentle creak of a wooden ladle stirring a pot, and with a rooster crowing not out of urgency, but out of habit. The first light of day filters through the palm leaves with a glow that is more gold than white, more welcome than blinding. In the soft belly of this light, the barrio begins to stretch and stir. Inside the Bahay Kubo, the family wakes slowly. The mother is the first to move. She sits up without saying a word, tying her hair back with a strip of old fabric. Her footsteps are silent on the bamboo floor. She heads straight to the fire, which she had buried in ash the night before to preserve its glow. With a breath and a few dried twigs, the coals awaken again, glowing softly, like old eyes opening to greet the day. The pot of lugo is placed above it, thick with garlic and ginger, meant to warm the stomachs of everyone before the busyness begins. The father yawns as he sits upright, scratches the back of his neck, and steps outside to pour a basin of water over his face. The splash echoes faintly through the trees. The water is cold, drawn from the well before first light. He doesn't flinch. This is the only way he knows how to wake up properly. As he towels his face dry with a faded cloth, he hears it, faint at first, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. The sound of drums. Somewhere near the chapel, the youth ensemble has begun their practice. Their palms strike stretched goat-hide. Their feet shuffle in sleepy rhythm. They don't yet march. They murmur. It is the soft beginning of what will become thunder. But for now, the drums just speak low words to the morning. A rhythm like a prayer. Not to ask for something, but to thank. The children, half asleep, rub their eyes and sniff the air. They smell the lugo, and behind it, something sweeter. The smoky scent of calamay being stirred across the yard by a neighbor. A thick wooden paddle moves in figure eights across a giant wok, folding coconut milk, sugar, and sticky rice into a golden brown memory. Flies hover nearby, but a child with a fan keeps them away lazily, more out of tradition than concern. People begin to appear, slowly and gently, like figures forming from fog. Lola Sabel from the corner house walks past in a bright yellow duster, her hair tied into a bun, holding a bundle of jackfruit leaves. She nods at no one and everyone. She knows her presence has already been accounted for. Behind her, a young girl carries a basket of eggs tucked in banana leaves. Not one breaks, though she skips lightly down the path, singing under her breath. Each household has its rhythm. One family boils pancit, while another lays out plates along the bench they scrubbed yesterday. Children set out chairs, not perfectly. Some wobble. No one minds. The joy is not in symmetry, but in effort. In the soft chaos of many hands making something together, the church bells finally ring. Not loud, not sharp, but slow and drawn, like someone pulling at time itself. The clang spreads like a ripple, moving through houses, trees, and fields. It signals not just the hour, but the moment. The fiesta has begun, not with fireworks, but with breath, with light, with footsteps on dry earth and pots clinking together and the soft shuffle of a boy tying his sash just a little tighter because this year he gets to dance. The plaza is not full yet, but it has changed. A stage has been raised. A makeshift arch of palm leaves and paper flowers now frames its entrance. Children have begun to gather there, wiping the last of the morning's crust from their eyes, checking their costumes, whispering lines they practiced in secret. A girl runs barefoot across the stone path, holding a ribbon and laughing too loud. Her mother scolds her, but the scolding ends in a smile. The air is filled with promise, like the last inhale before a song. Every smell, every breeze, every movement feels connected, like strands of coconut rope being twisted into a single thick braid. The sky, cloudless and clean, watches patiently above. In the middle of all this, the boy from the previous day stands with his family at the edge of the crowd. He eyes and t-shirt whether to run toward the plaza or stay close to the kitchen where his favorite puto is still steaming. He shifts his weight back and forth, eyes wide. His sister hands him a folded banana leaf, still warm. He holds it carefully, as though it were a letter from the sun. The drums grow louder. The people grow closer. The day stretches its arms, and though everything is about to come alive, for one last moment, the world still holds its breath. Part 8. The day unfolds. The night returns, and the barrio breathes again. The sun now sits fully in the sky, proud and warm but not cruel. Its rays slip between tree branches, bounce off tin roofs, and dance across the freshly swept plaza. The barrio, once so still, now pulses with gentle energy. Children run barefoot on cobblestones, their laughter a ribbon cutting through the morning air. The smell of roasted chicken, fried bananas, and sweet cassava swirls together into one thick, delicious breeze. No one is in a hurry, but everyone is moving. Banners flap overhead, strips of fabric cut from old shirts and school uniforms, now reborn as symbols of celebration. They sway to the beat of drums now in full rhythm. The percussion is deep, warm, almost ancestral. You don't just hear it, you feel it in your ribs, in your spine, in your souls. It guides the dancers as they weave between benches, their feet tapping a rhythm older than memory. Each stomp is not just performance, it is a conversation with the soil. The procession begins from the chapel. Simple, at first, children holding candles, women with baskets of flowers, the elders in white barong and lace veils. At the center, the wooden sant lifted, high on a bed of flowers and woven leaves moves, as if it walks on its own. Some wipe their faces with handkerchiefs blessed by proximity. It is not spectacle, it is trust, dressed in tradition. All around, stories unravel. A group of men recount how they once danced this same street 20 years ago, though their knees were less willing now. A girl forgets her step during the folk dance and hides her face in her palms. Her Lola cheers anyway, clapping with full pride. The boy who once hesitated at the edge now spins in the middle of the crowd, barefoot and glowing. No one stops him. He belongs to the moment as much as the music does. Lunch is eaten wherever there is shade under trees, under awnings, on the bamboo floor of a neighbor's home. Plates are shared, dishes are swapped. Strangers become cousins. The rules of ownership blur. If you are hungry, you are welcome. If you are full, you are family. As afternoon wanes, the sun begins to mellow. The light softens, shadows grow again, but this time they do not creep. They stretch like tired arms reaching for home. The plaza quiets. The dancers take a final bow, the drums give one last echo, and just like that, the sound dissolves. The children grow drowsy from rice and sunlight. Their eyes flutter. Some fall asleep on wooden benches, heads resting on mothers' laps. Others lie under trees, cradling makeshift pillows made from folded sashes and The men carry empty pots back home. The women wash utensils under shed pumps, laughing gently at small mistakes and burned dishes. And then comes the twilight, not sudden, not loud, just a smooth curtain drawn across the sky. The clouds blush as they lower themselves. The wind becomes cool again. Lights are lit, not electric, but small oil lamps and flickering candles. They line windows and altars. Their glow isn't bright, but it is honest. The boy returns to his Bahay Cubo, now with dust on his ankles and sugar on his lips. He sits by the door, tired but full. His sister hums again, the same lullaby from days ago. Their mother pours hot water into a tinned cup. The father leans against the wall, his face lined but smiling. The Santo Niño is returned to its shelf, now crowned with fresh petals. The night settles like silk, one by one, homes dim. The wind carries the scent of spent candles and sun-warmed soil. Frogs begin to sing again. A single drum is tapped somewhere in the distance, just once, like a heartbeat, and then nothing. The barrio exhales. Inside the house, the bannig is unrolled. The mosquito net descends. The children, now quiet, close their eyes. The mother whispers a prayer without sound. The candle flickers once, and then the world falls into stillness. Not silence because silence is empty, but stillness because everything, for now, is exactly where it needs to be. Part 1. The quiet port before the storm, long before the world arrived on ships. Before maps even remembered this place, there was a sleepy little settlement tucked beside the bay. It didn't have a name yet, not one written down. At least, it was just Ang Pantalan, the dock, the edge of land where the water kissed the soil and fishermen tied their outriggers to bent mangrove roots. On days without wind, the sea looked like glass, and when it rained in long, warm curtains, gently turning the world to watercolor. At first glance, nothing moved. The boats lay idle, their sails down, their hulls rocking softly with the breath of the tide. The sand was pale and grainy, speckled with broken shells and burnt firewood from last night's small cookouts. Crows hopped between the driftwood, pecking lazily at what the sea didn't want. And yet, beneath the silence, there was rhythm. A fisherman wiping his knife with the same motion his father once used. A child scooping seawater into a half-coconut shell, pretending to be a merchant. A woman turning over dried fish on a balau, her fingers moving without looking. The air was thick, not from pollution, but from time. It smelled of salt, sun, and old stories. Of drying squid, of last week's spilled oil, of rain that hadn't fallen yet. When you stepped into this town, you didn't arrive. You settled, your shoulders dropped, your breath slowed. Everything invited stillness. The homes here were simple, yet proud. Bamboo and palm. A few were raised on stilts, their feet in the mud like the herons nearby. Others leaned, slightly, shaped not by design but by storms survived. The walls were thin, and you could hear neighbors even without trying. The clink of clay jars, the sound of laundry being slapped against stone. A lullaby hummed for no one but the wind. The people were like the tide, calm, patient, and constant. They rose early, not out of duty, but because the sun did. They worked quietly. They laughed quietly. They argued quietly. Life didn't need to be loud to be lived. And in that silence, things grew. Stories, salt stains, love, rot, forgiveness, all left to age in the open air. One man, old but not fragile, sat each morning by the port with a pipe that never lit. He carved driftwood with a blade as short as his finger, making animals no one asked for. Carabaos, turtles, lizards with wide eyes. He placed them all on a log near the dock. No price, no explanation. And yet, they disappeared one by one, taken by children, by travelers, by the sea. The town had no plaza, not yet, just an open patch of earth near the center where people gathered when needed. For weddings, for trade, for news, carried by the occasional visitor from the north. The church was half built, its bell still wrapped in cloth, waiting for the day it would ring its first sound across the bay. Until then, prayers were spoken under trees, over pots, whispered beside beds, with no pillows. Time didn't tick here, it sighed. Days melted into each other like wet leaves. Even the calendar was uncertain. People marked days not by numbers, but by events. Nung nawala yung bangka ni Dado nung dinala inji Castilla yung libro Sakura. These were their reference points, not dates, not systems, just moments that felt heavier than others. And yet, on this particular morning, there was something different. A quiet pause that lingered a little longer. The birds didn't cry out right away. The waves hit the stones a little harder. The old man's hands trembled ever so slightly as he carved his lizard. From far beyond the horizon, where the sea met sky in a blur of grey, a shadow began to form. A small one, steady, a sail. But no one noticed yet. The soup still simmered, the fish still dried, the town still breathed its slow, rhythmic breath, unaware that the world was about to change. When shoes touched sand and words made no sense, the shadow on the horizon grew slowly. So slowly, in fact, that no one truly noticed, not at first. It arrived like everything else in this port town did. Quietly, respectfully, without grand declaration. The only difference was that it didn't arrive from within, like a cousin returning from another barrio. It came from beyond the sea, and the sea, while calm, was never known for returning things unchanged. The first real sign was the bird, not a local one, not the kind that nested in the mangroves or circled the fishermen's boats for scraps. This bird was larger, darker, with wings that didn't flap often but glided, cutting across the blue sky like it knew something the others didn't. It passed over the bay in silence, and the old man with the wooden carvings looked up from his log, squinting at the shape. He didn't say anything. He just wiped his blade on his knee and continued. Then came the sound. Distant, hollow, unlike the beat of any drum. They knew, not rhythmic, just there, a repeated thump, like heavy wood against heavier water. Some thought it was thunder, others thought it was a whale, but no storm was forming, and no whale had ever stayed this close to shore. When the sail finally came into view, white, sharp, like the wing of a sky spirit, people began to gather, quietly, cautiously, children first, then their mothers, then the men, who walked toward the edge of the dock with their arms crossed, not in fear, but in thought. There was no rush, no alarm, only the collective inhale of a town that had spent generations watching the sea, but had never been watched back. It wasn't just one boat, it was several. Smaller ones followed behind the first, their hulls deep and dark, the wood unfamiliar. The sails bore symbols, crosses, stripes, things the locals didn't recognize. They were not tribal marks, not merchant flags. There was something else. Not threatening, yet not comforting either. The memory beneath their tongues. The chapel was full now. Every Sunday, every feast day, every whisper of rain that might ruin the crops brought people kneeling before the altar. They prayed in words that were taught to them. They crossed themselves the way they were shown. They bowed before statues brought from seas they had never sailed. But in their hearts, somewhere quiet, deep, dusty, with time, the old prayers still echoed. They didn't say them out loud. Not anymore. Not since the new priest arrived. He was younger than the last, smiled less, watched more. His sermons were long and firm. Not angry, but heavy. He quoted books none of them could read. He corrected pronunciation gently, but often. He believed in their salvation, and they believed in not being so they obeyed. Out loud. But in their kitchens, they whispered. Lola Pising hadn't died. Not yet, but she no longer walked to town. Her joints ached, her breath was shortened, her hands trembled. Still, she sat on her wooden chair every dusk, facing the mountain, and hummed the songs no one else dared sing. One day, a girl from the chapel choir, 12 years old, voice sharp as a bell, wandered past Lola's house. She heard the old woman humming and stopped, just for a moment. The tune was different, strange like a song from a dream. "What's that, Lola?" she asked, not afraid. Lola didn't open her eyes. She just answered, soft and slow. "That is a prayer your Lola sang to keep the storms away." "But we already have prayers for that," the girl said. Lola smiled. "So did we." Later that week, the girl hummed a melody to herself while sweeping the chapel floor. She didn't realize the priest was nearby. He stepped out from behind the column, gently took the broom from her hands, and asked, "Where did you hear that?" She looked down. "Nowhere, Poe. Just something I dreamed." The priest nodded, but his eyes stayed on her too long. In the weeks that followed, the town became quieter, but more watchful. People began to wear their rosaries tighter, not out of devotion, but as armor. Every gift was now offered with both hands. Every word was weighed before being spoken. Still, the resistance didn't stop. It grew in the way a mother braided her daughter's hair in the old style, even as she made her wear the dress sewn by the priest's apprentice. It lived in the way old men carved patterns into wooden bowls, spirals and sigils and suns. Patterns the foreign teacher said were tribal clutter, but the children copied anyway. It danced in the way fishermen still tapped the side of their boats 3 times before casting their nets, even though they now said a foreign prayer after. No one called it defiance. They called it habit. But habit, when shared across 100 lifetimes, becomes heritage. One night, Utoy, older now, nearly grown, sat beneath the chapel stairs, fingering a string of beads his father had given him. They weren't from the priests. They weren't rosary beads. Just smooth stones, polished by river and thumb. He remembered little things. The old names for constellations. The way his grandfather used to tell stories without using words. Just hand motions and silence. He remembered the taste of a broth that hadn't been cooked since the foreigners outlawed certain spices for health. A boy his age passed by and saw him holding the beads. "That's not allowed anymore," he said. Nervous, Utoy didn't answer. He just placed the beads back into his pocket and smiled. The boy walked away, but he looked back twice. That same night, the bell rang again. Late, off schedule, loud in a way that wasn't holy, just final. The townspeople awoke to whispers. Someone had taken one of the Spanish books from the chapel and hidden it beneath the roots of a mango tree. No one confessed. No one searched. But that morning, during Mass, the pews were quieter than usual, not because of shame, because of choice. And as the priest spoke about light and truth and obedience, a mother sitting in the back row ran her fingers along her child's spine, tapping out a rhythm that wasn't in the hymn book. 3 beats, 2 beats, 3 beats again. A song her grandmother taught her. A lullaby no one could punish. And somewhere in the trees, the wind carried it back, low, gentle, and alive. The rain that remembered their names. The rains returned without warning. Not as a storm, not in violence. Just ... presence. A steady, soaking presence. The kind of rain that softened, hardened earth. The kind that didn't shout, but whispered endlessly, pattering against thatched roofs and stone church tiles like the ticking of some ancient, invisible clock. It rained for days. Then a week. Then almost 2. Crops drank it in. Clay roads turned to gentle sludge. Chickens retreated beneath woven crates. The children grew restless, but not wild. Something in the air told them to stay still. Not afraid, just reverent. The rain wasn't punishment, it was memory. Inside their homes, the people sat with oil lamps glowing like tiny, stubborn stars. The chapel, once full every day, began to echo with emptier pews. Not because of rejection, but because of ritual. In the rain, people remembered older ways. In one home, a grandmother gathered her family around a clay pot and began a story with no beginning. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for silence. But the children leaned in anyway. Her tale meandered, part myth, part memory, part warning, and the rain tapped its approval on the windows. She spoke of a mountain that once opened to swallow a snake made of smoke, of a boy born with no shadow, of a woman whose hands turned to flame whenever she lied. She didn't say whether they were true, but no one asked. Truth was beside the point. Meanwhile, the foreign priest noticed the quiet. His voice still carried over the wooden pulpit. His candle still burned on the altar, but the rhythm of the town had shifted beneath him, like a raft drifting from its moon. When the boats finally reached the shallows, the water lapped against them, as it did with any visitor, gentle, curious. The first man to step off wore shoes. That alone caused a murmur. Shoes on sand were unheard of. They didn't match the earth. He stumbled slightly, adjusting to the texture beneath him. His legs were pale, his pants heavy. He carried something, not a weapon, not clearly, but metal, long, polished. Behind him, others followed, some with beards, some with wide-brimmed hats, all with faces that squinted not just from sunlight, but from unfamiliarity. They looked at the houses, at the trees, at the people, but most of all, they looked at the faces. Not in awe, not in superiority, just observation, like mapping a place with their eyes. No one ran, no one shouted. The children stood behind their mothers, clutching strips of cloth. The elders stepped slightly forward, saying nothing. The man with the pipe that never lit stayed seated, carving another shape without looking up. Then came the first voice, a single word, loud, clean, unfamiliar. It rang out like a bell that hadn't yet been hung in the church tower. The sound startled a nearby dog, who barked once, then sat down again. The villagers didn't respond, not because they were rude, but because the word carried no meaning. It was like a leaf blowing in from a tree they had never seen. The foreigner repeated it, slower, as if that would translate it. Still, silence. One of the village boys laughed. Not mockingly, just from surprise. His mother hushed him quickly. The sound of the sea filled the pause. Eventually, the man pointed. To himself. Pedro, he said, tapping his chest. A girl whispered to her older brother. Pedro do, Pangalania. The brother shrugged. Then he pointed to the boy. No, the boy blinked to you. Ato. The man repeated, nodding like he understood something he didn't. More pointing, more names. The exchange of sounds like stones skipping across water. Some fell flat, some echoed. Nothing stuck, but the attempt was made. Not fluent at all, but not hostile either. Gifts were offered next. Dried meat wrapped in cloth. A small wooden carving shaped like a bird. A necklace of tiny shells. The villagers gave nothing yet, not from selfishness, but from caution. From knowing that when you give, you also receive, and not everything you receive is visible. The foreigners smiled often. They gestured widely. They laughed too loud. Their faces were open, but their hands were full of tools, of books, of objects, whose uses the villagers couldn't guess. There was something heavy about their presence. Not like a threat, more like a question that no one had asked, but was now waiting to be answered. By late afternoon, the boats were docked. The men had walked the dirt path that led between the homes. They ducked under low palm beams. They stared at woven mats. They tasted broth when offered. Some nodded in thanks. Others made faces but still smiled. One took a flower and tucked it behind his ear. Still, no one fully understood each other. Not yet. But that night, as the sun dipped below the edge of the sea and the sky turned orange, the town sat a little quieter. Dinner was cooked, children played, but every sound, Every step, every glance carried a new weight. Because now there were eyes watching from the dock, shoes sitting outside homes, languages being spoken in corners, and something invisible, slow, but certain, had begun to change. New words, new ways, and the slow tilt of old routines. Days passed, not with thunder, but with polite footsteps and awkward smiles. The men from the ships did not leave. They stayed. Their clothes changed to match the heat. Their tones softened. Their beards were trimmed with borrowed knives. They began to take off their shoes when entering the huts. Not always, but often, enough to seem respectful. In return, the townspeople began to open their palms just a little. It started with bowls of rice set down near the guests, not offered directly, just placed within reach. Then came the roasted fish, the sour tamarind soup, the sweetened cassava bowls wrapped in leaf. The visitors tried each one, sometimes wincing, sometimes asking for more. They laughed through their chewing, not to offend, but because they were learning. Taste, like words, was a kind of frontier. The man called Pedro was the first to write. He didn't do it to impress, at least not openly. One quiet morning, he crouched in the dirt near the church's half-built steps and began drawing symbols. Not pictures, not the curving lines of Babayin, or the decorative marks children scratched into tree trunks. These were foreign shapes, rigid, precise, each one a tiny blade. Letters, though no one knew the word yet. The boy called Utoy watched him. Pedro pointed to the marks, tapped his own chest, then wrote again. Pedro, the word said. You, he gestured, tapping the boy, then drew more marks. Utoy tilted his head. Pedro smiled, nodded. The boy didn't understand the letters, but he recognized effort, and effort, in this town, mattered more than skill. By noon, a crowd had formed around Pedro's dusty script. Children copied it with sticks. Some adults peered over shoulders, curious. No one mocked, no one corrected, just quiet repetition. Curious hands in warm soil, tracing the edges of change. The next day, another foreigner brought out a book, thick, bound, its pages curled from salt air. He held it gently, reverently, as though it contained fire. He didn't open it right away. He simply held it in his lap while sitting beneath the old mango tree, as if waiting for permission. Eventually he turned the cover and began reading. His voice was soft, his accent heavy, the words foreign. Still, people listened, not because they understood, but because they didn't. There was a rhythm to the sound, a solemnity, something sacred, though no one said so. The listeners didn't ask what the book said. They didn't question its purpose. But when the reading ended, and the foreigner closed it with a gentle thud, no one moved for a while, not even the wind. It wasn't just the reading. There were tools, mirrors, small and square, catching the faces of children who had never truly seen their own expressions. Nails sharper than thorns, metal pots that didn't break when dropped, a strange powder that burned clean. These things didn't arrive all at once. They trickled in like the tide, unnoticed until the shore looked different. In exchange, the locals gave what they had: baskets, hand-woven mats, coconut wine, names of rivers and stars, songs sung to the sea. The foreigners listened, nodded, scribbled, catalogued. They tried to repeat the words, often poorly. Mayong, Aga, Bituit. Their tongues stumbled, but their eyes remained bright. They were guests, yes, but guests who had brought a mirror and were slowly holding it up. One afternoon, a group of villagers returned from the hills, carrying a long, wounded snake. It had wandered into the crops and startled the goats. Normally, it would have been left to the elders, slaughtered, blessed, buried, but that day, one of the foreigners asked to see it. He examined its teeth, its belly, its eyes. He did not speak. He simply nodded, then drew it in charcoal in his leather-bound book. Later, Utoy peeked at the sketch. It looked almost alive. Still, not everything was seamless. Some villagers began to whisper that the sea had changed, that the fish no longer came as they once did, that the stars above seemed to shift in patterns unspoken, that the Santo Nino's altar, still unfinished, suddenly felt less familiar, even though it had never been touched. One woman, Lola Paising, refused to let the foreigners near her home. Hindi sila masama, she said, pero may dalong ibang angin. They bring a different wind. She kept her windows closed, her cooking pots buried. Her rosary beads made from river stones clinked loudly as she walked, on purpose. But most others didn't resist, not out of weakness, but out of kindness. The town had always welcomed those who knocked gently. Why should this be different? And so, day by day, the rhythm shifted. Not broken, just altered. Mornings began with greetings in two tongues. Children now traced letters in the mud beside their baba. The marketplace sold both dried fish and strange white bread. The old games were still played, but someone now kept score. A priest in training, young, foreign, soft-spoken, began helping with the church roof. No one said the town was changing, but the chickens clucked differently. The silence between footsteps grew longer, and the boats no longer pointed only inland. They looked outward, waiting. The old voices grow quiet, and the new one rings louder. The town was still standing. No one had been taken. No one had been forced. But somehow, the place felt lighter now. Not in joy, but in weight. The silence had changed. It used to feel full, like coconut milk, thickening over fire. Now it felt hollow, like a pot left on the stove after the fire had gone out. At the heart of it all was the chapel. Once a skeletal frame of wood and palm, it had grown into a stone-limbed creature, its arms reaching up toward a sky that barely recognized it. The roof was tiled now. The door was wide and heavy. The bell, once wrapped in cloth, once silent, now rang every morning, every noon, every sunset. Not a harsh sound, but certain, a sound that didn't ask permission. People came, not all, not always, but more and more, not because they understood, but because they were told it mattered, because there were chairs now, because there were hymns, translated slowly, sung with eyes closed, because the foreign priests smiled when they came, and frowned when they didn't, not in cruelty, just in quiet disappointment. And no one in this town liked to disappoint a guest. Lola Pising still stayed away. She boiled her water 3 times a day. She whispered to the wind in the mornings. Her house, made of bamboo and thorns, seemed untouched by time. Children said she spoke to spirits. Adults didn't correct them. They just looked away. But even Lola Pising noticed how things moved differently now. The prayers before meals changed. Where once there were chants in the old tongue, slow, circular, passed down like recipes, now there were lines repeated from books. Books the people couldn't read yet, but they trusted the sound of them. They trusted the way the priest's voice rose and fell, like he was singing with someone no one else could see. At the school, a hut that used to be for drying root crops. New lessons were taught. The letters came first, then numbers, then names of places no one had seen. Madrid, Roma, Dios, Rey. The children recited them like spells, not knowing their power, just knowing they were expected to remember. The games in the afternoon changed too. Some still played tugotogwan, still built toy boats from bark, but more often now, the boys lined up and marched, not because they were told to, but because the visitors showed them how. A stick became a sword, a hat became a crown. They called each other Capitan, Teniente, Padre. They were pretending.
Yes.
But pretending, when done, every day, has a way of becoming true. The market began to shift, where once there were barters, rice for salt, fish for firewood. Now there were coins, small, round, stamped with faces no one recognized. The fishermen didn't trust them at first, but the priest said they were good, so they listened. After all, the priest had never asked for anything but faith, and now, perhaps, a little change. There was still music, but even it sounded different. The bamboo flutes were softer now, sometimes drowned out by new instruments brought from the ships. Guitars, slightly out of tune. Hymns that lingered long after the sun had set. The songs weren't bad, they just didn't belong to the soil yet. One night, Yutoy sat by the shore, looking at his reflection in the water. He used to imagine he was a bird, a monkey, a storm. But now, he imagined he was a scribe, a servant of the king, a boy in a church. He didn't know where the images came from, only that they came more often. Beside him, Pedro, older now, more tired, watched the horizon. He lit his pipe. Finally, after all these months, the smoke curled upward, a lazy ribbon in the wind. "You learn fast," he said to Yutoy. In broken Tagalog, Yutoy nodded. "You teach every day." Pedro didn't smile, just looked out at the sea. "It is good," Pedro added. "But remember who you are." Yutoy didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. That night, the rain came. Not hard, just steady. A kind of rain that didn't flood, but erased. Prints in the sand. Ash from the fires. lines drawn in dirt by small sticks. The stars hid behind the clouds. The wind hummed no lullaby. The world felt paused, and in the distance, faint but certain, the bell rang. He knocked on doors. They opened politely. He asked if the people were well. They nodded, but their eyes were distant, like waves watching stars. At the edge of the town, near the base of the mountain, something older stood. The trail that once led to an abandoned shrine forgotten since the Chapo's completion was cleared quietly, not by a mob, just by hands that remembered where the stones once lay. No one built anything new. They just sat on rocks, palms to knees, facing the mist. There were no candles, no incense, no hymns, just listening. And the mountain, soaked in rain, listened back. Utai had grown taller, his shoulders now squared, his hair tied back with a woven cord he'd made himself. He still attended the chapel, still recited the verses, still smiled when the priest called him by his Christian name. But at night, he walked the paths others had forgotten. Paths that led past trees where fabric strips once hung, paths where ancestors whispered not in words, but in rustling leaves, and the way frogs stopped croaking all at once. One evening Udoi found himself at the stream where his grandfather used to bathe before the harvest moon. The water, swollen from days of rain, moved lazily but surely over the rocks. He knelt, not to pray, just to feel. He placed one hand in the water, the other he laid flat on the mossy stone beside him. He didn't speak, but something answered anyway. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, not loud, but sharp enough to scatter fallen leaves. The branches above him bent, creaked, then held, and from the mountain came a low groan. Not thunder, not earthquake, just the mountain remembering its voice. Utoi looked up, not afraid. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Its light wasn't harsh. It didn't proclaim victory, it just arrived like a friend returning after a long journey. The earth steamed, the roof stripped, the children ran out to feel warmth again. But that day, the chapel was only half full. Some families stayed home to dry their old altars. Some walked the mountain trail barefoot, and some, like Utoya, walked both paths, one in each foot. By nightfall, the rain had gone completely. The stars returned in numbers the people had forgotten they could see. And just before sleep, a mother traced an old spiral into her daughter's palm. Not a drawing, not a symbol, just a reminder of what came before, of what never truly left. When the silence was watched and the smiles were thin, the sun stayed, but the warmth felt different now, sharper, like a hand placed too long on your shoulder. Not pushing, but not quite welcome either. The rains had gone, the streets had dried, and the chapel bell rang louder than before, not in volume, but in urgency. Something had shifted. The foreign priest, once calm, curious, kind, had begun to watch differently. His gaze lingered longer. He asked more questions. His sermons grew sharper, the words more exact. He no longer simply spoke of salvation. Now, he warned of disobedience, of darkness hiding in old habits, of evil slipping through songs sung in forgotten tongues. He said the mountain path led nowhere. He said the stream was cursed. He said there could only be one truth. People still came. They still filled the pews, still sang the hymns, bowed at the altar, kissed the wooden feet of saints carved with pale hands. But something had broken underneath the surface. A thread, a trust, a rhythm. Now, when they sang, it was softer. Now, when they knelt, their eyes drifted toward the open windows, toward the mountain's silhouette beyond the trees. The priest noticed, and the smiles stopped. The questions began, politely, at first. During confession, over shared meals, a hand on the shoulder, a gentle voice. Did you go up the trail again, Iko? If you hesitated, the smile would tighten. You must stop. That place is not holy. If you asked why, the answer was always, because I said so. Some obeyed, out of fear, not faith. Others lied, not out of malice, but protection. Some just stayed silent, and silence became dangerous. Children were told not to hum old lullabies. Schoolboys were warned against speaking words, not in the new lessons. A girl was punished for carving a spiral into the dirt outside the chapel door. She didn't cry. She just looked at the mark as it was erased. But the people remembered, quietly, carefully. They cooked the old recipes in secret, adding leaves no longer blessed. They buried tokens in their gardens. Stones, hair, salt, wrapped in leaves. They began placing a bowl of water under the moon again. Not to drink, just to reflect. Utoi now carried two names. The one the priest used, and the one whispered to him by Lola Pising before she passed. He never wrote it, never spoke it aloud, but when he walked the forest paths, when he crossed rivers barefoot, when he touched the bark of the old trees, that name throbbed like a heartbeat behind his ribs. One day, the priest held a meeting in the plaza. Not a sermon, a warning. He held up a wooden idol, one found buried behind someone's hut. It was carved with eyes too wide and arms folded in a pose the chapel did not recognize. "This is sin," he said. The people didn't move. Sam nodded. Most didn't. "This is witchcraft," he said louder. "This is what keeps you in darkness." He placed the idol on a block and raised a hammer, but before he could strike, a child, no older than 8, stepped forward, took the carving, and placed it gently into a basket of flowers by the chapel door. She said nothing. Neither did the priest. The people began to leave, one by one. No shouting, no rebellion, just departure. That night, the wind returned. It carried no rain, no ash, just the scent of wet earth and burning leaves. And beneath it all, the faint rhythm of drums no one had played in years. Not heard with ears, but felt in the bones. The priest stood at the chapel door, clutching his books, his candles, his certainty. But the village had turned away. Not in anger. In remembering what was buried now blooms again. The town didn't rise up. It didn't burn the chapel. It didn't cast the priest out. That was never its way. The people here were carved like the land patient, slow to shift, but impossible to smooth out entirely. And the land, after all, remembered everything. The chapel still stood, the bells still rang, the hymns still echoed through the valley. But they no longer echoed alone. Because one day, as the people sang their morning psalm, another sound joined it. A deep, low hum, coming from the hills. No words, just vibration. A chorus not made by mouths, but by trees. It didn't interrupt. It wove itself between the verses, like thread through cloth. And the people didn't stop singing. They just began to listen differently. The priest noticed. Of course he did. His voice grew louder, his sermons longer. He spoke now of purity, of cleansing, of casting out the past like rot from a fruit. But the fruit, they knew, had never been rotten. It had just grown differently. That week, a boy carved a wooden figure and placed it not in secret, but on his windowsill, visible to all. A mother let her daughter wear beads with old patterns sewn into her dress. A man placed water at the foot of a tree and didn't explain to anyone why. No one knocked it over. No one told him to stop. Not even the priest. Because he was starting to understand. They weren't asking for permission anymore. They weren't fighting. They were remembering. And remembering was harder to silence than rebellion. Utoi now, with shoulders broad and a calmness inherited from every ancestor before him, taught the young ones both sets of prayers. Not one or the other. Both. He called them Dalawang Elig, twin rivers. Drink from both, he told them, but remember which one filled your bones. The children listened, not because they were told to, but because he spoke the way rain falls. Steady, soft, sure. The mountain remained quiet, but not asleep. The trees bore new fruit that year. The river swelled wider. The old paths, once overgrown, were now clear again. Not paved, not marked, just walked every day, without being asked. The church still lit candles, but so did the forest. The chapel choir sang in Latin, but under moonlight, old songs returned, with voices low, harmonies imperfect, but hearts full. And in one quiet home, a mother once again traced a spiral into her baby's back before laying them down to sleep, not for protection, but to say, "You were never lost, you were never gone, you were only waiting." The priest stayed. He was not chased away, but he was no longer the only voice people followed. He became one rhythm among many, and in time, even he sat beneath the mango tree, hands folded, listening to a song he could not translate, but no longer tried to stop, because some truths don't need words, they just need space. The flag that covered the sky. The changes didn't come with shouting. Not at first. They came with uniforms, with boots that crushed not just soil, but custom, with paper nailed to tree trunks. In languages only a few could read, but everyone could feel. And at the very center of it all, a flag It arrived on a day with no wind, a canvas of deep red and foreign gold, draped across the chapel roof like an announcement. The priest said nothing. He didn't raise it, but he didn't take it down either. And so it stayed, casting a strange shadow across the altar. The people stared, some with confusion, others with recognition. For many, it was the first flag they'd ever seen. But even those who had never heard of empires, of nations, of wars waged far across oceans, they understood instinctively. This cloth was not decoration, it was declaration. From that day on, soldiers arrived. They didn't barge in, they marched. Clean boots, straight backs, faces unreadable eyes, trained to look past rather than at. They stood at corners where grandmothers once sold root crops. They walked along trails where lovers used to sneak glances through bamboo thickets. They posted signs that no one asked for. And slowly, without a single gun fired, the rules changed. Curfews were whispered, then written. Words like order and civilization appeared in sermons. Taxes were no longer baskets of fish or jars of oil. They were coins, counted by hands that trembled. And when the coins fell short, chickens vanished, firewood went missing, children cried quieter. The people did not resist, not openly. They had been taught well. How to smile with their mouths and hide their names behind their teeth. How to obey with their hands and rebel with their silence. Utoy watched, older now, sharper. His arms were lean from work, his eyes darker than before. He didn't carry a blade, he didn't speak loud, but when he walked, the children followed. Not from curiosity, but instinct. He still visited the stream, still traced patterns into the dust with his heel, still sat by Lola Pising's grave on full moons, leaving offerings of salt and sugar. But now, he also listened carefully at the plaza, to the soldier who always drank too much, to the teacher who had stopped smiling, to the wind, which no longer carried birdsong, only dust. One afternoon, a soldier caught a boy drawing a spiral into the church floor with the stub of a candle. "What is this?" The soldier barked, boot crushing the light. The boy froze. "Speak," the soldier ordered. The priest intervened. "It's just a child's game," he said quickly. "Nothing more." The soldier narrowed his eyes, then walked away. The priest knelt beside the boy, whispered, "Don't do that again." But the boy didn't cry. He simply wiped his hand on his shirt and whispered, "I wasn't drawing. I was remembering." That night, the flag waved in the wind. The first time it had moved since it was raised. It flapped above the chapel, above the plaza, above the silence. The people looked up, but they didn't stop walking. They didn't salute. They didn't bow. They simply walked around its shadow. Because the sky was never theirs, but the land still was. The price of silence and the shape of obedience. The rules no longer whispered. They barked. The soldiers were no longer just watchers at the edge of the market. They now stood at every corner. Inside the chapel, beside the school, I sat where the village elders used to gather, as if authority could be worn like a coat, passed from old men to young strangers with polished rifles. The paper signs were clearer now, written in 2 languages, one foreign, one newer, both equally sharp. Curfew at sundown. No. Gatherings larger than 5. No chants. No processions. No offerings. Not sanctioned by the chapel. Violations were met with correction. Sometimes it meant sweeping the plaza under watchful eyes. Sometimes it meant standing in the sun with arms raised until shoulders shook. Sometimes it meant a boy disappearing for a night, returning quieter, his smile carved away. No one asked questions. Asking was dangerous. Asking suggested you remembered how things used to be, so most obeyed outwardly. The markets adjusted. Roots were sold in silence. Eyes flicked instead of words. Children were taught to say yes sir and no sir in a tongue that made their throats feel too tight. But in their homes, where the flag's shadow didn't reach, they remembered bread was still baked the old way, without the priest's flour. Hair was still braided in patterns that told stories, if you knew how to read them. A pot of rice left by the door meant more than just hunger. It meant mourning. It meant resistance. Utoy moved differently now. He didn't just listen, he learned. He watched how the soldiers drank. Which ones got loud, which ones got lazy. He memorized their paths, their schedules. He noticed which chapel guards left their rifles near the altar when praying. He learned how to speak their language, and when not to. But Utoy did not lead anything. There was nothing to lead. There was no rebellion. Not yet. Just a quiet, aching refusal to forget. One day, a man was taken. His name was Nando, a fisherman. Kwai laughed like a cracked drum. He had carved a small idol from driftwood, an old god, smiling wide. He left it near the chapel door, not as mockery, as memory. They found him 2 days later, face down near the river, rope burns on his wrists, no marks on his back. They had learned not to make resistance visible. The priest said nothing, the soldiers said less. But the people, they did not weep loudly. They lit small candles, dozens, hundreds, quietly placed on window sills, tree roots, well stones. None in the chapel, all in the dirt. And the river that night rose higher than it had in weeks, as if mourning, as if remembering. Still, the punishments grew sharper. A boy beaten for wearing a bracelet woven in the old pattern. A woman fined for cooking with herbs not approved by the clinic. A teacher dismissed for telling a folk story before class. And the children watched, not with fear, with knowing, because they were beginning to see the pattern, not the pattern of rules, the pattern of cracks. Utoi knew what came next, not because he was special, but because he listened. He saw it in the soldiers' twitch when the old songs played beneath breath. He saw it in the priest's sermons. Longer, louder, but emptier. He saw it in the trees. Bending more now, not from wind, but from weight. Something was coming. Not a war. Not yet. But something louder than memory. Something that would ask them not just to forget, but to betray. The chapel had changed. Not in shape. The walls were the same. The bells still rang. The statues still stood with their painted smiles. But the feeling, that sacred hush, that breath of safety, was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. It wasn't a church anymore. It was an office, a checkpoint, a mouthpiece. The priest had changed too. He still wore white, still held his book like a weapon, but his eyes no longer searched for souls. They scanned for threats. His sermons no longer asked for prayer. They demanded allegiance. He called them sheep, now, not children. He spoke of rebels in disguise, pagan poisons, native rot. He no longer scolded the old ways. He cursed them, and behind him, during mass, stood soldiers, not kneeling, not praying, just standing, with rifles, watching. Still, the pews remained full, not because of faith, because of fear. Attendance was now counted, absences were investigated, and at the end of every mass, names were called, some for blessings, others for questioning. No one knew which was which until it was too late. In response, the people became quieter, but not empty. They folded old chants into the cadences of new prayers, hummed lullabies under their breath while reciting verses, clenched their fists inside their pockets when the soldiers blessed the bread. They found cracks, and in those cracks, they planted silence like seeds. Utoi watched the priest carefully now. He wasn't angry. Anger was loud, and Utoi had learned to move like water. But he watched, and he listened. He saw how the priest no longer used his own words. Every sermon now came from letters, sealed with wax, delivered by a horse. Utoi stole one once, read it in the dark. It was written in a stiff, foreign tongue, but he made out enough. Increase compliance. Eliminate cultural, receipt, reinforce crown ideology at pulpit. He read it twice, then burned it, and walked to the river, where the water ran thinner now, as if tired of carrying so many secrets. That week, an old man was made to kneel at the altar and recite a prayer of repentance. His crime, lighting a candle at the base of the old bolete tree. No offering, no ceremony, just a candle, a single flame in the dark. The priest called it blasphemy. The man called it remembering. The punishment was public forgiveness, but everyone knew it was humiliation, and so the people began to mask their remembering even deeper. They spoke less in markets. They laughed quieter. Even the drums, the hidden ones, softened their rhythms, played only with fingers, now, not sticks. But they did not stop, because some things don't need volume to survive. That night, Utoi gathered a few friends. Only those who still remembered the names of the old constellations. They sat in a field past the last rice paddy, far from the chapel bell, and one by one, they pointed at stars and said their names, not in the new tongue, in the first tongue, the one that came before, Balatik Mapur Tarik. Each word was a refusal, each breath, rebellion, no banners, just stars, and silence, and memory. It happened on a Sunday. The chapel was full, fuller than usual. The priest stood tall, a scroll in one hand, his voice loud enough to reach even the ones hiding at the back. Soldiers lined the aisles like pews of iron, rifles resting on their shoulders, eyes harder than stone. Today's sermon wasn't about love. It wasn't even about God. It was about loyalty, about enemies hiding in plain sight, about cleansing the heart of superstition, about submission. The people listened, heads bowed, lips moving only when told to. The air inside the chapel felt thicker than incense. It hung over them, pressing into lungs, flattening ribs. Then the name was called. Utohi stood slowly, not in defiance, not in fear, just with calm. The priest didn't ask questions. He gave commands. Come forward. Utoi did. The space in front of the altar had been cleared. The table pushed back. The candles snuffed. All that remained was stone, stained darker than it should have been. The priest held up a worn idol, cracked and smoothed from years of touch, a spiral carved deep into its chest. Found, he said, beneath this boy's sleeping mat. He raised it higher. A sign of rebellion, of sin. He turned to Utoi. The silence was enough. The priest nodded. Then let this be a lesson. A soldier stepped forward, baton raised. No ceremony. No verdict. Just punishment. The first strike landed across Utoi's ribs. Sharp. Flat. Final. He staggered. The second cracked across his back. He did not fall. The third caught his shoulder, spinning him toward the pews, where children gasped and mothers shut their eyes. Still, he did not scream. He did not beg. He simply looked up, not at the priest, not at the soldiers, but at the rafters, and whispered, "They're still watching." A pause. The world held its breath. "Who?" the priest asked sharply, his voice cracking. Utoi smiled. "A broken, bloody thing. The ones you tried to bury." Another strike came, then another. By the fifth, the floor beneath him was no longer clean. Blood pooled. Not much. Just enough. Enough to stain the stone, enough to make the priest's voice tremble when he returned to his sermon. Utoi was dragged out. His head hung low, but his eyes stayed open. Watching, remembering. The next day, the people gathered. But at the river, quietly, slowly, they didn't bring banners. They didn't chant. They just walked the old path. One by one, each carried something small. A flower, a stone, a leaf, a shell. They dropped them into the water, not as protest. As promise, the soldiers didn't follow. They watched from a distance. Maybe they knew better. Maybe they feared what the river might carry back. That night, Utoi lay beneath a thatched roof, pain like fire in his bones. But around him sat 6 children, each holding a different instrument. A flute, a drum, a gourd with beans. They didn't play loudly, just softly enough that he could hear the land humming again. The chapel bell rang the next morning, but it didn't drown out the song. Not anymore. The echo in the earth and the names that disappeared. The chapel floor had been scrubbed clean. Kneeling women were made to polish it until their fingers bled. No one said why. No one dared mention the stain, but they all knew. Even if the stone gleamed again, the blood still lived beneath it, seeping into grain, into memory, into silence. Utoi had not been seen since. Some whispered he was taken away to another village. Others said he died on the trail and was buried under a tree that blooms out of season. But the old women, the ones who never stopped whispering to the wind, they said nothing. They just kept putting bowls of water outside their door at dusk, and every night the water rippled. The town grew quieter. Not calmer, just heavier, like a room where everyone is waiting for someone to speak, but no one knows what words are safe. Children now played only in daylight. Laughter became short, clipped, measured like rations. The market lost color. Bright cloths were folded away, patterns hidden, music muted, and then, one by one, names started disappearing. The teacher Aling Koring gone without farewell. The old herbalist Mang Isco transferred to a different barrio. His hut emptied overnight. Chickens still waiting at the door the next morning. Even the priest's apprentice vanished. The one who used to hesitate before each sermon. The one who sometimes cried when no one was looking. Gone, no graves. No goodbyes. Just absences. And yet, the land still moved. The river still flowed, though slower now, as if mourning. The trees still bent toward the east, toward the mountain, and the wind once still, now carried a hum, not music, not language, just vibration. Something deep, something older than the chapel. It didn't come like a storm. It came quietly, like a shadow stretching too far, too fast, across the ridges. The sky that morning was pale and choked, not from clouds, but from smoke. A dense, aching veil that clung to the trees and made the chickens restless. The first to smell it was a child, who pointed at the horizon with eyes wide and unblinking. By noon, the scent was unmistakable. Charcoal, burnt leaves, something worse. The wind carried ash, soft grey flakes that fell into rice bowls and onto windowsills, the way petals fall after morning. And when the first farmer stumbled into the plaza, barefoot and shaking, they all knew this was not a wildfire. They burned Sanroque. The man gasped, his chest heaving, eyes too bright. No one had to. The soldiers had been quieter lately, more tense. Their eyes darted more often. Their rifles were always loaded now, even during sermons. What happened in Sanroque wasn't an accident. It was an example. A warning sent without parchment. The priest said nothing. He didn't offer prayer. He didn't quote scripture. He just turned, walked into the chapel, and shut the door harder than he needed to. That night, the bell rang 3 times. Once for order, once for fear, once for silence. A curfew was declared, not on paper, but in the way. Boots marched more often, and glances from uniformed men lasted a few seconds too long. The people obeyed. At least on the surface. Doors shut earlier, lamps burned lower, voices grew softer. But beneath the floorboards and in the shadows of old kitchens, something began to stir. Grandmothers boiled water not for tea, but for remembering. Fathers touched old amulets tucked in shirt linings. Children asked about Utoy again, and this time, the grown-ups didn't shush them. They just looked toward the east, toward the mountain, and said, "Sleep. He's watching." The fires didn't stop. They moved, creeping along the ridge like a story too dangerous to speak. At night, distant orange glows dotted the horizon like fallen stars. But within the village, smaller fires lit up in answer. Controlled, intentional, an old kind of signal. They burned dry twigs and carved out coconut husks, sending thin lines of smoke through slatted windows. No one taught them to do it. They just remembered. And somehow, the mountain remembered too. The next morning, the river ran clearer. Faster. The birds returned. And one tree near the abandoned trail, a bolete thought dead, had bloomed overnight with pale yellow flowers. Then came the whisper. Utoy had been seen, not spoken to, not touched. Just seen. A shadow by the ridge, a figure in the fog, a barefoot shape crouched beside a wild boar's trail, eyes reflecting like a cat's. They said he didn't speak, but watched. That he had grown, lean, quiet, and that the land moved with him. A hunter claimed his snare had been sprung but not stolen, only disarmed. A child swore she saw him leave fruit on her doorstep. The priest denounced it all. Utoy is gone. He snapped from the pulpit. There is only one truth now, and it wears a crown. But the people no longer nodded. Not all of them. Not like before. They started to hum again. Low, breathy melodies with no lyrics. They began to walk the long way to market, passing under trees known to listen. They stopped kneeling in the chapel, choosing instead to sit, not out of defiance, but because their backs had grown tired of folding to a god that no longer looked like them. And still, the fires came. Another village was lost, this time with no survivors. The smoke turned blacker, angrier. The soldiers grew paranoid. They shouted more. They drank more. And in their drunkenness, they began to say too much. One confessed to a girl that the crown was scared, that what they couldn't kill in battle, they would starve, that they weren't here to save, but to erase. The girl said nothing, just held his gaze until he looked away. The next morning, she walked to the mountain trail barefoot, her dress stained with ash. She placed 3 stones in a triangle and whispered, "He's coming back." No one knew how she knew, but that night, the clouds above the village split just enough to reveal stars that had auntie been seen in years. Then came the footprint, not in town, but on the ridge, beside a spiral drawn in soot. Fresh, too large to be a child's, too clean to be accidental. The soldiers found it first. They didn't report it. They just stared. One of them, a boy barely 16, knelt beside it and whispered something. No one heard what he said, but afterward he placed his rifle down and never picked it back up. The priest tried to hold another sermon, but the pews were thin. The people had begun gathering elsewhere, under trees, by streams, in the ruins of the old world. They spoke less of salvation and more of names. Not just Utoy's names older than the chapel, names tied to rivers and rocks and the smell of wet soil. And in those gatherings, no one led. They just remembered. And the land, for the first time in years, began to hum again. Not loudly, not in anger, just in rhythm. When the memory refused to kneel, the village tried, for a while longer, to survive in between. Not quite obedient, not quite rebellious, just breathing under the pressure of someone else's sky. It became a balancing act. Mothers told their children to sing the hymns louder, but hum the lullabies softer. Elders bowed their heads in chapel, but buried rice grains in the dirt the old way, hoping the land would still recognize their hands. The people walked through life like stepping over glass, never pausing, never still, always careful not to bleed. But in the silence, something began to wear thin. Not just patience, but the illusion that they could endure forever without breaking. It started with the baker. Mangalius was not a firebrand. He was gentle, soft-voiced. He sang when he worked and never raised his hand to anyone, not even in his youth. He had flour on his elbows and laugh lines like crow's feet. He made bread the old way, with rice husks mixed into the dough and sacred salt folded under the crust. Most people thought he was harmless, until he was gone. No noise, just one morning, the oven cold, the doors ajar, and his footprints leading away from his hut, stopping abruptly at the chapel's back gate. The priest said nothing. The soldiers shrugged. No one confirmed he had been taken, but everyone knew. His disappearance hit different. This wasn't a child, not a quiet elder. This was Mang Elias, who fed the poor when the harvest failed, who made sweet buns during wakes to ease mourning. If they could take him, they could take anyone. And in the days that followed, the air in the village changed. It wasn't just heavier, it was full, charged, like lightning hiding in silence. That same week, a soldier, one of the younger ones, was found crying behind the granary, not from pain, but from guilt. He had grown up in a nearby province. He knew the songs, knew the names, knew that what they were doing wasn't justice, it was erasure. He said he dreamed of Utoy walking out of the mountain with fire in his hands. He said Utoy didn't speak, but his eyes made the rivers run backward. The soldier was gone by morning, not reassigned, not dismissed. The priest responded the only way he knew how, with fire and fear. He stood at the pulpit like a blade now, sharp and brittle. His sermons became accusations, his prayers became ultimatums. He shouted names, demanded confessions, warned of hell not beneath the earth, but behind every tree that didn't bow to the crown. And still, the pews emptied. Not in protest, in quiet refusal. The people had begun gathering again. This time not in secret, not in fear. By the riverbank, in the shade of trees whose roots curled like knotted stories. They brought nothing but themselves. No weapons, no banners, just old songs, soft feet, and the names they refused to forget. They sang Mangalius's name like a hymn, lit candles in cracked bowls, floated them down the river, and as each one drifted, the children whispered, Utoy is watching. That same night, the chapel bell rang. Not by human hand. No one was inside. The priest swore it was wind, but there was no wind that evening. Only stillness, and after the bell stopped, a sound lingered. A single, low drumbeat, echoing faintly from the ridge. Then another, then silence. And again, a beat, like a heartbeat too large to belong to any man. The soldiers searched the woods. They found nothing. But behind the chapel, etched into the door with soot and stone, was a spiral. Not scratched, burned, clean, precise. A mark no fire should have left. The priest ordered it removed. The next morning, it was there again. And beside it, written in red clay, a name. Elias. The people had never fought. Not with blades. Not with fists. But now they understood. Their memory was the battlefield, and they were done pretending they didn't remember. The mountain that finally spoke back. It happened at dusk. Not a moment later, not a moment before. As if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for the exact second when light and dark stood on equal ground. The sky wasn't red, nor gold. but the in-between hue of memory, like old parchment soaked in dusk. And in that hour of almost night, the mountain began to hum. It wasn't a sound anyone could point to. It didn't come from trees, or wind, or beast. It came from underneath, from the roots, the stones, the bones, buried long before the chapel was built. It was a deep, vibrating silence that shook the water in bowls, made the dogs whimper, made the eldest among them weep. Not from fear, from recognition. Something ancient had been called, and now it had arrived. That day, the people didn't go to work. They didn't touch their fishing nets. The children didn't play. The chapel doors were left ajar, but no one entered. Not even the soldiers. They stood still, hands twitching, unsure if their weapons mattered anymore, because something bigger had taken the air. At the center of the village, someone lit a fire, not a wild blaze, but a calm, careful one. The kind you sit beside, not to warm your hands, but to listen. Around it, people gathered in quiet rows, sitting cross-legged, shoulder to shoulder. No one spoke, not at first, until a voice rose. Not loud, not trembling. A woman, white-haired, once a midwife, now a keeper of names. She said Utoy's name, then Elias's, then Mangasco, then the teacher, the apprentice, the herbalist. Each name was a thread, and the fire, one by one, the villagers spoke their names, too. Not the names written on paper, but the old names. The names their grandmothers whispered when no one was watching. The names the river knew. And when the last name had been said, a drumbeat echoed from the mountain. Once, then twice, then silence, then a cry. Not human, not animal, but something sacred. Something with lungs made of stone and memory. And through the fog near the ridge, a figure stepped forward. He was taller now, not because of years, but because of weight. The kind of weight only memory can give. Barefoot, shoulders scarred, eyes burning not with anger, but clarity. Utoy. Not a vision, not a ghost, but alive. Behind him, others emerged. Faces unfamiliar but familiar at the same time. People thought lost, thought silenced, all standing, all breathing. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their presence was a language older than words. The soldiers moved to lift their rifles, but something stopped them. Not force, not threat. Just ... Gravity. A kind of gravity that made violence feel small. Their fingers trembled, their knees bent, and for the first time since the chapel's flag was raised, no one moved to obey her. He didn't climb the altar. He didn't strike the priest. He didn't make a speech. He knelt, pressed his palm to the earth, and whispered something no one heard. But everyone felt. A wind rose, not from the mountain, from the ground, soft, carrying ash, salt, the scent of old fires, old prayers, and old truths. Then the spiral appeared, drawn in flame, right there in the dirt, not lit, grown, and from within it, flowers began to bloom. Tiny white ones, like stars, unfolding between stones and footprints. The priest dropped his book. The flag fell from the chapel roof. No one picked it up, because they understood now. The land had chosen, and it chose those who remembered. Part 1. The echo leaves the valley. Word traveled slowly. Not by messenger, not by courier, but by something older. Wind, smoke. Memory passed from hand to hand like glowing embers hidden in cold ash. It spread not through letters or law, but through the weight of silence that suddenly held shape. The kind of silence that made people stop mid-sentence, glance toward the ridge, and wonder what had just changed. In villages far beyond the mountain, places that hadn't spoken Utoya's name in years, people began to dream in spirals. Elders woke with wet eyes and no understanding of why. School children began to draw unfamiliar symbols into the dirt with sticks, then forget where they learned them. Something had shifted, not just in one place, but everywhere, and it was terrifying. Not because it was violent, but because it was undeniable. The world, once held together by forgetting, had started to remember. In the capital, the palace felt it too. The advisors didn't say it aloud, not at first, but they noticed how the papers were getting thinner, how the crops near the outer provinces were failing despite clear skies, how the soldiers stationed in the highlands were sending fewer reports, then none at all. The maps, carefully drawn with straight lines and flags, began to curl at the corners, as if the paper itself knew it was lying. The crown issued proclamations, orders, Official truths read aloud in the plaza by men who looked less like messengers and more like men afraid of what might happen if they didn't read every word. Exactly right. And yet, the crowds shrank. No one listened. Or worse, they listened and smiled like they knew something the officials didn't. Because they did. They had heard about the mountain. They had heard Utoy's name. Not as a myth. As a movement. The priest, the same man who once thundered about loyalty and sin, had been found wandering the riverbanks, robes soaked and voice gone. He no longer spoke in sermons, only in whispers. He told stories about flames that danced without burning and eyes that stared through you like memory incarnate. He said the chapel no longer accepted his prayers, that when he lit the candle, it refused to catch fire. They called it madness, but no one laughed, because the people had already begun to leave, not flee. Leave.com/measured, walking in small groups with their tools wrapped in cloth and bundles strapped to their backs. They didn't shout, they didn't cry, they just walked, following the direction of the mountain, guided not by compass, but by instinct. And with each step, they whispered stories about a barefoot boy who never forgot, about a tree that bloomed in winter, about a flag that finally stopped flying. The stories weren't written, but they lasted longer than ink. They lived in the breath between two strangers who shared the same wound, in the glances exchanged across market stalls, in the small altars built behind homes, not to saints in robes, but to the memory of those who stood and bled and knelt and came back. The crown responded the only way it knew how, with control. More soldiers, more laws, more words shouted in places that had already gone quiet. They tried to rewrite the story faster than it could spread. They accused the wind of conspiracy. They blamed the soil. They arrested mothers for singing lullabies that didn't come from books. But none of it stopped what was happening, because the resistance had already slipped beyond their grip. Not as an army, but as an idea. And you can burn books, silence, voices, crush bodies beneath boots. But you cannot kill an idea that has taken root in soil that remembers. By the time the first scout returned from the mountain's edge, trembling, pale, with a spiral burned into his palm, it was already too late. The fire had gone out in the chapel. Yes, but the flame was alive in 1,000 kitchens, 1,000 dreams. 1,000 quiet songs carried on winds that refused to blow in straight lines. The echo had left the valley, and the crown, for the first time in generations, realized it was afraid of something it could not see, name, or destroy. It was afraid of remembering. It was afraid of you. The towns that woke with dust in their throats. It began with the dust, fine, pale, and strange. It wasn't ash, nor sand, nor the powdered limestone that clung to workers' hands after shaping bricks. This dust came suddenly, riding the breeze at dawn and coating windowsills in barrios far from the mountain. Farmers found it on their roofs, soft and dry, like memory in powder form. Children ran their fingers through it and came away marked with spirals they didn't remember drawing. No one knew where it came from. The weather was calm. No volcanoes had stirred, and yet, day by day, the dust kept appearing. It filled the cracks in stone walls, gathered in corners of schools, settled atop holy books without respect or fear. In the town of Lagaslassen, an elder woman stirred in the early hours, coughing as if someone had called her from a dream. She awoke not with fear, but with recognition, the kind that makes your body move before your mind can catch up. She threw open her doors and walked barefoot into the morning, her feet sinking into the thin blanket of dust. It smelled familiar, earthy, sharp. The scent reminded her of the cave behind her childhood home, where her grandmother once lit oil lamps and whispered prayers not found in church. That cave had been sealed years ago, declared unsafe by crown engineers. But now, with every breath, she felt that same warmth in her chest, the warmth of something returning. Other towns followed. In Silong, the market, women began humming again. Tunes with no lyrics, rhythms carried on instinct rather than memory. They said it helped the rice cook faster, the soup taste fuller. They said it kept away sickness. No one taught them the melody. It simply arrived. And once one woman began, the others followed. It spread like rain after drought. Even the children began to tap their heels a certain way while playing, in sync with a beat they'd never been taught. "It's from the mountain," one old man muttered, almost an apology. "We're just remembering what we forgot." Meanwhile, the officials sent reports, slow and confused, filled with words like unusual behavior, uncooperative communities, and spontaneous gatherings. They called it cultural leakage, a term that tried to make memory sound like a problem to be mopped up. But the truth was harder to pin down. The rebellion wasn't organizing. It wasn't holding secret meetings or printing leaf. It was leaking, spilling, breathing. The memory was not being spread. It was being unearthed. And no amount of arrests, or bans, or loudspeakers could stop what had already begun, pulsing through the roots of the nation. In one town, a soldier found his own mother placing red clay figures on their ancestral altar, small icons shaped like leaves and fish and sleeping faces. He asked her why. She looked at him calmly, offered him a bowl of water, and said, "You were born with your feet in this soil. So was your father. The land knows your name, even if you've forgotten it." He didn't report it. He couldn't. That night, he stood watch beneath the flagpole, eyes fixed on the horizon, and for the first time in years, he wept. Farther still, in a fishing village untouched by sermons or bullets, the sea changed color, not wildly, just slightly, a subtle shift, like the ocean blushing. The elders said it was the blood of the ancestors rising to remind the fish who they once belonged to. The fishermen no longer chanted the crown's prayer before casting their nets. They simply whispered names of the drowned, rebels, grandfathers, orphans, and the waters, somehow, began to give more. And in the capital, the tension grew thicker than smoke. The crown's ministers debated furiously behind closed doors, their maps increasingly marked with black ink and vague symbols. Spiral graffiti began appearing even there, small ones, carved into the backs of doors, into alley walls, into the wax seal of documents meant for the highest officials. One morning, a young clerk fainted after reading a report that ended with a sentence no one had written. "We have forgotten too much." When he came to, he couldn't speak, only traced the spiral with his finger on the tiled floor. This was not just a crisis of order, it was a crisis of reality. The people had begun to remember things the crown never wrote down, and when memory returns on its own, wild, ungoverned, sacred, no institution can contain it. Not with laws, not with guns, not even with forgetting. The towns that woke with dust in their throats, it began with the dust, fine, pale, and strange. It wasn't ash, nor sand, nor the powdered limestone that clung to workers' hands after shaping bricks. This dust came suddenly, riding the breeze at dawn and coating windowsills in barrios far from the mountain. Farmers found it on their roofs, soft and dry, like memory in powder form. Children ran their fingers through it and came away marked with spirals they didn't remember drawing. No one knew where it came from. The weather was calm. No volcanoes had stirred, and yet, day by day, the dust kept appearing. It filled the cracks in stone walls, gathered in corners of schools, settled atop holy books without respect or fear. In the town of Lagaslasan, an elder woman stirred in the early hours, coughing as if someone had called her from a dream. She awoke not with fear, but with recognition, the kind that makes your body move before your mind can catch up. She threw open her doors and walked barefoot into the morning, her feet sinking into the thin blanket of dust. It smelled familiar, earthy, sharp. The scent reminded her of the cave behind her childhood home, where her grandmother once lit oil lamps and whispered prayers not found in church. That cave had been sealed years ago, declared unsafe by crown engineers. But now, with every breath, she felt that same warmth in her chest, the warmth of something returning. Other towns followed. In Ceylon, the market, women began humming again. Tunes with no lyrics, rhythms carried on instinct rather than memory. They said it helped the rice cook faster, the soup taste fuller. They said it kept away sickness. No one taught them the melody. It simply arrived. And once one woman began, the others followed. It spread like rain after drought. Even the children began to tap their heels a certain way while playing, in sync with a beat they'd never been taught. "It's from the mountain," one old man muttered, almost an apology. "We're just remembering what we forgot." Meanwhile, the officials sent reports, slow and confused, filled with words like unusual behavior, uncooperative communities, and spontaneous gatherings. They called it cultural leakage, a term that tried to make memory sound like a problem to be mopped up. But the truth was harder to pin down. The rebellion wasn't organizing. It wasn't holding secret meetings or printing leaf. It was leaking, spilling, breathing. The memory was not being spread. It was being unearthed. And no amount of arrests, or bans, or loudspeakers could stop what had already begun, pulsing through the roots of the nation. In one town, a soldier found his own mother placing red clay figures on their ancestral altar, small icons shaped like leaves and fish and sleeping faces. He asked her why. She looked at him calmly, offered him a bowl of water, and said, "You were born with your feet in this soil. So was your father. The land knows your name, even if you've forgotten it." He didn't report it. He couldn't. That night, he stood watch beneath the flagpole, eyes fixed on the horizon, and for the first time in years, he wept. Farther still, in a fishing village untouched by sermons or bullets, the sea changed color, not wildly, just slightly, a subtle shift, like the ocean blushing. The elders said it was the blood of the ancestors rising to remind the fish who they once belonged to. The fishermen no longer chanted the crown's prayer before casting their nets. They simply whispered names of the drowned, rebels, grandfathers, orphans, and the waters, somehow, began to give more, and in the capital, the tension grew thicker than smoke. The crown's ministers debated furiously behind closed doors, their maps increasingly marked with black ink and vague symbols. Spiral graffiti began appearing even there, small ones, carved into the backs of doors, into alley walls, into the wax seal of documents meant for the highest officials. One morning, a young clerk fainted after reading a report that ended with a sentence no one had written. "We have forgotten too much." When he came to, he couldn't speak, only traced the spiral with his finger on the tiled floor. This was not just a crisis of order, it was a crisis of reality. The people had begun to remember things the crown never wrote down, and when memory returns on its own, wild, ungoverned, sacred, no institution can contain it. Not with laws, not with guns, not even with forgetting. When the capital heard footsteps, it began with the ground. Not an earthquake, not a rumble, just a subtle shift in pressure. The kind that makes teacups tremble on their saucers. The kind that rattles the breath in your chest without ever touching your skin. In the palace, a window cracked on its own. At first they blamed the heat, but then it happened again, and again. In rooms where no one walked, in halls where no wind blew. The walls of power, centuries old, reinforced with stone and fear, began to groan softly at dusk, like they were remembering something they'd once tried to forget. The ministers called for inspections. The engineers found no fault, and yet the groaning persisted, soft, low, like breathing, like footsteps, like something approaching. The people in the capital began to change, too, not all at once, but enough. A man who had served in the Crown's archives for 30 years stood up from his desk one afternoon, walked to the center of the library, and began to tear pages from a forbidden book with calm, deliberate precision. He said nothing. He didn't shout. He simply wept as he worked. Not out of madness, but out of clarity. When they dragged him away, the guards noticed something etched into the inside of his sleeve. A spiral drawn in dried ink, and what looked like crushed flower ash. That night, 2 more clerks vanished. They left no notes, just a bowl of river water and a stone placed where their names once were. Rumors moved through the capital like smoke, that the boy, the barefoot one, the spiral walker, had been seen beyond the southern hills, that he had not aged, that he no longer spoke, but people heard him anyway. They said he walked through cities in silence, and wherever he passed, birds forgot how to fly straight, and bells rang at the wrong hour. That gardens bloomed where his feet had touched, and guards who tried to stop him found their rifles rusted by morning. Of course, the ministers denied it all, but even they began to meet in smaller rooms, quieter rooms, with no windows. The palace priest tried to respond. He stood atop the great stone steps at noon, sun burning his brow, robes brilliant as gold, and spoke of loyalty, order, history. He told the people not to listen to winds that carried stories instead of facts. He declared the spiral a symbol of rebellion, of ruin. He called the boy a curse that threatened their future. But his words were swallowed by the air. No echo, just silence. The kind of silence that sounds like judgment. And when he reached the final line of his sermon, one he had delivered for years, the words caught in his throat. He looked out at the crowd wide-eyed and whispered, "He's already here, isn't it?" They say he collapsed before the final word could leave his lips. That same hour, the fountains in the plaza began to overflow. Not violently, not in destruction, just freely. More water than ever before, and within the ripples, a new pattern emerged. Spirals, slowly forming and dissolving again, like breath on glass. People gathered, not in panic, in stillness. They watched the fountains in silence, as if waiting for instructions, but none came. Only the hum of wind, only the distant call of drums from beyond the walls. Elsewhere in the city, old doors reopened. Not by hand, but by time. A shuttered bathhouse behind the cathedral, long abandoned, was found unlocked and immaculate. Inside were murals no one remembered painting. Vines, birds, spirals, a lantern lit on its own. The smell of river clay filled the air, and etched on the floor were names. Too many to count. None of them famous, all of them real. By nightfall, the people of the capital no longer walked with urgency. They moved as though under a larger rhythm, some internal compass guiding them toward places they'd forgotten. They knew. Small gatherings appeared in alleyway. Silent meals were shared in candlelight. And old songs, long outlawed, unsanctioned, unrecognized, began to hum again through thin walls and open windows. Unafraid, because something was coming. Not an army, not a flame, just a memory so heavy, so alive, that even the city built to forget could no longer hold it out. And from the edge of the capital, a boy walked forward, alone. And behind him, the footsteps of the forgotten followed, slow, steady, eternal. The day the walls forgot their purpose at dawn, the guards saw him, not in a blaze of light, not with horns or flags, just there, beneath the western archway, standing, breathing, watching, barefoot, as always, clothes dusted with soil and smoke. The boy, taller than the myths said, older than the drawings, but unmistakable. A spiral carved gently across his collarbone, not in blood or ink, but something older, something etched by memory itself. And he didn't move. He just waited, like he knew the capital would move first. Inside the palace, the alarm bells stayed silent, not because there was no threat, but because the bells had cracked in the night. All of them, hairline splits across bronze and iron, like veins across skin. When the bellmen tried to ring them, the clappers wouldn't swing. The sound wouldn't come. One by one, they stared at their instruments, stunned, shaken, as though realizing they no longer spoke the language of this moment. The ministers, sleep-deprived and wild-eyed, scrambled. Some ordered troops to form a line, others screamed for horses, for radios, for fire, but no orders stuck. Soldiers hesitated. Horses refused to move forward. The radios, for the first time in recorded memory, emitted only static, the kind that felt like a presence pressing against the ears, like someone listening too closely from the other side of the air. The king, if you could still call him that, sat in his chambers, watching the spirals grow across the tiles. Slowly, persistently, he tried to wash them off with oil. They returned. He called for the high priest. No one came, and when he looked into the polished gold mirror above his desk, he didn't see his face. He saw a mountain, covered in fog, and a single, ancient tree blooming with fireflies. When he blinked, it was gone. But the shaking in his hands did not stop. Outside, the boy stood still, and people gathered, not just rebels, not just believers, but citizens, clerks, bakers, children, former guards, mothers who once marched under the crown's banners. They came slowly, barefoot or in slippers, some carrying bundles, others nothing at all, and no one spoke. They simply stood near him, behind him, beside him. No commands were given, no slogans chanted, but somehow everyone moved with one rhythm, one breath, one truth. The palace guards aimed their weapons, but couldn't fire, not from fear, from recognition. One saw his sister in the crowd, another saw his grandfather, one saw a girl he thought he'd lost to a purge 10 years ago. The rifles lowered. The soldiers didn't break, they just stopped. Then the wind shifted. A small thing, but with it came the scent of river stone and old clay, the kind used in the villages to make offering bowls and mark names on the dead. The wind carried songs too soft to be sung aloud, lullabies humming in the bones, and with it, a faint vibration rolled through the ground. Not an earthquake, a heartbeat, as if the capital was no longer sitting on land, but on memory that had woken up and had begun to breathe again. The boy stepped forward, just once. One step, and every door in the palace slammed open, not outward, inward, and from within the throne hall, a moan echoed, not from any person, but from the stone itself, a sound like grief, like a house remembering its crimes. The spiral had reached the gates. Not with fire, not with war, but with memory too loud to be silenced anymore. The boys stood in the courtyard, surrounded not by an army, but by memory made flesh, men, women, and children who had remembered their names in the dark. The palace loomed ahead, its great arches and marble columns glinting under the morning sun like teeth. For centuries, this was the seat of forgetting, the place where names were buried, histories rewritten, and silences bought in gold. But now, the silence that returned was different. It wasn't absence, it was presence, a silence so complete, it rang louder than any war drum. No decree came, no soldiers stepped forward. Even the palace hounds, bred for war, had gone still. One of them, an old brindled beast, lay at the foot of the throne stairs, eyes half closed, breathing slowly, as if even he had remembered a different world. One where people sang to the moon, and rivers were not taxed. The boy took another step. This time, the sky dimmed, not from clouds, but from smoke rising gently from the cracks in the city's stone. Not fire, not violence, just smoke, the scent of burned offerings, sweet leaves, old bark, and dried petals. The kind of smoke once used to carry prayers upward before the crown replaced prayer with taxes. It curled around windows, slipped under doors, filled the lungs of those watching from towers and rooftops. And within it, they saw, not visions, but truths. The king emerged, crowned crooked eyes, hollow, his robe dragged behind him like a weight he could no longer carry. He looked not at the boy, but at the people behind him. His lips moved, forming a question he was too afraid to speak aloud. His knees gave first, then his voice. "I don't remember anymore," he whispered. The boy said nothing. He didn't need to. The wind answered. It rose from the earth, not down from the heavens. It carried no command, just 1,000 voices speaking all at once, not in unison but in harmony. Names, dates, places, the real history, the erased rituals, the people who had vanished and were now returned, not in body, but in breath. The spiral completed itself across the palace floor, drawn not by chalk or hand, but by shadow. And once the final curve closed, the air changed. The palace doors shut behind the king, on their own, softly. The building did not fall. It sank, stone by stone, as though the earth was reclaiming what had been stolen, not in rage, not in punishment, in balance. The ground opened gently, the walls folded inward like petals. The tower crumbled without a sound, and when the dust settled, nothing remained but a circle of scorched earth, and one blooming tree in the center, its bark dark, its leaves white as ash, its roots fed by centuries of forgetting. The people did not cheer, they simply knelt, not in worship, in memory. Around them, the birds returned, the air sweetened, the rivers surged, the wind soft, the children laughed. Somewhere, a flute began to play, not by command, but by instinct. The song wasn't written, but everyone knew it, and the boy, he walked away,